This is number 6 in our study of Joshua, and we're in Joshua chapter 6, just because we want to get a couple of background verses here. Now, some of you have been really complimentary in the study, in our study of Joshua, because you've said you've read this book, and you really didn't know that there was that much in there as we began to bring the things out. And it's true, and it's especially going to be true in Joshua chapter 7. You're going to think, oh, man alive, I've read Joshua 7. There's not much there. But in actuality, it is just filled with things that we're going to glean from this book. But before we do this, I want you to look over at verse number 21 in chapter 6. And they, speaking of the children of Israel, utterly destroyed all that was in the city, man, woman, young, old, ox, sheep, ass, with the edge of the sword. The only ones that were saved then, verses 22 and 23, were Rahab and her family. But then it says, they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and iron, they put into the treasury of the Lord. Now, you'll remember that the Lord said this is what he wanted them to do. In other cities, we'll find that God allowed them to take some of these valuable things and make it their own. They could share in the spoils. But for some reason, and I believe that we'll see it's a religious one, God didn't want any of the valuable things of Jericho to be part of any personal treasury. It was to go strictly into his treasury. Okay, so they conquered Jericho, and on they go. And verse number 1 of chapter 7. Now, mind you, they are riding high. They have a victory. But our coach used to always tell us after any time we'd win, that and a dime will get you a cup of coffee. Now, that dates me, but those were his words. Because now it's a buck. We'll get you a cup of coffee. But you cannot rest on your laurels. You cannot rest on your past performance. And you have to practice hard, relearn, rededicate yourself to winning. But it says in verse number 1, the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing. Now you'll remember that the word accursed, as we looked at it, meant devoted. It was only cursed if somebody took what belonged to God. And in fact, that's why the word trespass is used here. They began to wander in areas where they weren't allowed. And that was, these particular valuable things were to go into the treasury house of the Lord. And as far as everyone knew, everything did go there. But all of a sudden, God lets us know that they entered into these prohibited areas in the realm of the accursed thing. Now, they were cursed because they were devoted to God, but taken. And that gives us some indication of, if something belongs to God, like his glory, his integrity, those various things, and we try to make him something different than what he is, that's the accursed thing. We're trespassing. Now, it tells us then who did this. For Achan, the son of Carmi, Zabdi, and so forth, took of the accursed thing. So immediately we're told here what was happening to Israel. Now, how are we told? In Achan's name. In the Hebrew, Achan means the troubler. There's going to be trouble in the camp. He is going to cause other people to lose their lives, to lose inheritance, to lose face in front of their enemies, all because he took of something that didn't belong to him. Now, we are introduced here into a concept that is broader than just the individual. You know, a lot of times we teach here about standing on our own 2 feet, and we are responsible before the Lord for ourselves, and that's true. But even as a church group, if you get one out of sorts, it can spill over. If you get one who's not living for the Lord and so forth, sometimes they can cause trouble for other people. And sometimes a church can be affected in more church splits, and or people leave, or people get mad and so forth, just because one person was a troubler in the midst of a group. And that's the concept here. You've got one man that is going to affect a whole nation in their victory for the Lord. So Achan is a troubler. He's the troubler in the camp of Israel. And the anger of the Lord, it says, was kindled against the children of Israel. Now, Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai. Now, here's a neat thing about this. Again, using the meanings of these words to get a picture. Ai means a heap of ruins. And it says it's beside Bethaven on the east side of Bethel. Now, Bethaven means, Beth meaning house of, the house of vanity, and Bethel, the house of God. Now, let's get the picture here. Here's the house of God. Now, in the entrance of the main entrance of the temple and the main entrance of the tabernacle was on what side directionally? The east side. When Jesus Christ comes back, he comes through what gate? The eastern gate. You know, we talk about that. And that, what gate did he go through when he was riding on the colt, the foal of an ass? He went into the eastern gate when on so-called Palm Sunday. We know it wasn't that, but during that event. So, here's the house of God. Here's the eastern gate, the entrance to the house of God. But on the east side of the house of God, we have another house. Bethaven means the house of vanity, house of emptiness. It all looks good and sounds good and appears good and so forth, but it's all in vain. There's the arrogance of man there, the vanity of man, the conceit of man, and so forth is represented in Bethaven. But Bethaven stands in front of the eastern gate to the house of God. And instead of bypassing it to get to the house of God, you go to Bethaven and you can stay there in Bethaven, the house of vanity. The problem is, right beside the house of vanity is Ai, and Ai means the heap of ruins. Man's vanity is going to leave him in ruins. You know, it doesn't matter if we're rich, it doesn't matter if we're beautiful, if we're trusting in those things of man's wisdom, it's always going to leave us where? The heap of ruins. It's always going to destroy us and so forth. So this was the city that they were supposed to take. But the problem is, Israel became vain. Israel began trusting in themselves rather than God's strategy. Now, you remember, before they took Jericho with that weird strategy of walking around blowing those horns, not allowed to say anything for 6 days, and then shouting on the seventh, what did Joshua do? He looked up, and the captain of the host of the Lord gave him the strategy to take Jericho. But you'll note here, he did not pray, he did not seek God, he did not ask the Lord for his wisdom on how to take this city Ai. It says Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven on the east side of Bethel. And you have this picture here. If you stop at Bethaven and don't get to the house of God, you're going to end up in a heap of ruins in Ai. And so these men went up to view the country, and they viewed Ai. And they, the men, returned to Joshua and said, "Let not all the people go up." No talk with God here. It's all man's wisdom. And these men came back and said, "We don't know. This is not a group effort." Now you remember, how did they take Jericho? Group effort. They had the soldiers in the front, the ones tooting the horns and the next, those carrying the ark next, and then the people following. Every single person of Israel was involved in taking that city. Now, all of that was God's strategy. Now, all of a sudden, these men come back and say, "No, wait 1 second. We don't need everybody to be involved. This is not going to be a joint effort. It's just a little time. I mean, if we took Jericho, we can take these guys." And they left God out of the picture, and they left his planning out of the picture, and now something's going to happen. Just let 2,000 or 3,000 men go and smite Ai. Not make all the people to labor thither, for they, people of Ai, are but a few. So there went up thither the people, about 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. Here they come charging into the city, and all of a sudden the men of Ai come charging out of the city. Uh-oh, big mistake. Turn around, and they begin to turn their backs to their enemies. And the men of Ai smote them, about 36 men. Now, can you imagine? They just took the most powerful fortification, faced the army, and killed the most powerful army in all the land of Canaan. And now this little tiny city of Ai beats them and begins killing them as they're fleeing. They chased them before the gate to Shemarim and smote them to going down. Now what's happened to Israel? The hearts of the people of Israel melted and became as water. This is an interesting twist, isn't it? Because as Israel was crossing Jordan, coming up through the wilderness to the land of Canaan, what happened to the hearts of the Canaanites? They melted, you see. God was for Israel and against Israel's enemies. But now God is against Israel. And what happened? Israel now becomes afraid, timid. We better not go. We're going to get defeated here. All right, so what happened? Verse number 6. Joshua rent his clothes. People in the Old Testament are always doing that. They had on these mantles, and something happened to them. This dramatic show, take off their outer coat. So here goes Joshua. What's going on here? And he rends his coat. He fell to the earth upon his face before the Ark of the Covenant. You just see the drama and feel the tension and the emotion until evening. And they put dust on their heads. Now, here is one thing that at least they were showing some humility. Remember, Psalms 103 says, he remembers our frame, he knows we're dust. Takes back the original creation where you say, well, Lord, I'm nothing, I have nothing. You put dust on your head, and that's what they did. But note Joshua's prayer. Now, let me ask you this. Whose fault was it that Israel got beaten by Ai? God's? Nope. It was Joshua's fault. Why? He didn't ask God. He didn't say, well, now, Lord, look, you gave us this weird strategy, but we beat them, and now we better involve you in taking all of the land. How about this tiny city of Ai? But the picture is they didn't get to the house of God, Bethel. They were in the house of vanity, Beth Haven. And they're riding high. We don't need God. We have our own wisdom. We can conquer anybody, and so forth. And they left God totally out of the picture. And God showed them that this little city of Ai could whip them if he was out of the picture. It's sort of different between the David and Goliath here and Israel and Ai. This little David beat the Goliath with God, but big Israel couldn't conquer little Ai without God. So Joshua said, alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan? To deliver us into the hands of the Amorites. God, it's your fault. It's true, we were vain. It's true, we were proud. It's true, we didn't pray. It's true, we didn't seek your face. It's true, God, we left you out of the picture. Now, sometimes we do that. We continue with our lives and don't have devotions, don't consider the Lord, don't stay in fellowship and so forth. Then something happens, and who do we blame? God. When all along it's our fault, and that's what is pictured here. This is your fault, God. You brought us over the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us. Would to God we had been content to dwell on the other side Jordan. Now, how about that? You talk about arrogance. Here's a guy saying, Lord, you did this to us. Now we've come over here and we're defeated. We'd have been content to stay on the other side of Jordan. But now, where was God's will? The land of Canaan. I'll give it to you. Where was God's covenant? The land of Canaan. I'll give it to you and your descendants. This almost sounds like first generation theology, doesn't it? Come to Kadesh Barnea, go in. It is a land of milk and honey, but we're not going to go. They're too big for us. Okay. Oh Lord, what shall I say? Israel's turning their backs before their enemies. The Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it and shall environ round and cut off our name from the earth. Now, he's really worried about cooking his own goose here. He flubbed up, but Lord, what's going to happen? Well, our enemies are going to join together, surround us, and we're going to be cut off. And then he says that. And what will you do unto your great name? Oh, great. God, yeah, it's my fault, but now what are you going to do to your great name? So the Lord answered him kind of abruptly. Verse 10. The Lord said to Joshua, get thee up. In other words, he was acting like a whiny crybaby and so forth. Get thee up. Why are you lying upon your face? Israel has sinned. Obviously, Joshua, it's one of those well, duh situations. You have seen us, you started off in Egypt. You've seen us defeat the Egyptians, every army all along the way. You've seen us cross Canaan. You were there whenever Jericho was taken. And now all of a sudden, 36 men were killed. And you know something? In all of the battles from Egypt to that point, in 40 years, no soldier of Israel was ever killed. Now, all of a sudden, 36 men died, and you're blaming me? I protected you all this way. And you're not remembering these things, Joshua. First thing to go is the mind, and you seem to be forgetting a lot of things. Israel has sinned and transgressed my covenant, for they have taken of the accursed thing. Now, note there are 4 things here. They have taken the devoted thing. So here was Achan, the troubler. Every man went straight before him into Jericho, and I believe that Achan crossed a church in Jericho, and I'll explain this in just a little bit. But he crossed a cultic church in Jericho. And in this cultic church, he found 3 things: a Babylonian garment, a wedge of gold, and shekels of silver. And he took them, under the pretense of taking them to the treasure of the Lord. But notice it says he stole them. All of a sudden, he began to hide them because he had a safe place for them, he thought. He dissembled. That means that he deceived others. Where are you going with that loot? Oh, I'm going to take it to the treasury house. And all along, he was taking it back to his own tent. And then they have put it even among their own stuff. So he hid it in his own house, as we'll see in just a little bit. Note verse 12. Therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they were accursed. Neither will I be with you any more, except ye destroy the accursed thing from among you. Okay, now, the principle. If God be for us, who can be against us? Now, in salvation, God is always for us. But experientially in our lives, we're not always filled with the Spirit. We're in flesh 4. What does that mean? That means God is not for us. No, that we don't lose our salvation, but we're losing rewards, and sometimes God has to judge us. We are powerless before our enemies, and our greatest enemy is the old sin nature latent within. The world and the devil are external to us. We've seen the enemy, and it's me in the old sin nature. And if we are left powerless, leaving God out of the picture, then our enemies are going to win. God is no longer for us. And so that's the principle here. Neither will I be with you anymore, except you destroy the accursed thing. God is not going to be for us in our lives. He's not going to control history around us until we are back in fellowship. So, sanctify the people and say, sanctify yourselves against tomorrow. This is what the Lord's going to do. There is an accursed thing in the midst of you, O Israel. Now the picture is the old sin nature for us. You can't stand before your enemies until you take away the accursed thing from among you. You cannot stand against your enemies until you're filled with the Spirit. You cannot stay filled with the Spirit unless you apply the appropriate doctrine. On and on we go. So in the morning, therefore, you'll bring yourselves according to your tribes. Now here's a judgment for you. Remember, we've got probably several million people here, and they're all divvied up into 12 tribes. And so now, here the 12 tribes stand. It shall be that the tribe which the Lord takes shall come according to the families thereof. The families shall come according to the households. The households will come according to the man by man. And it shall be that he that is taken with the accursed thing shall be burnt with fire, and all that he has, because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he hath wrought folly in Israel. Now, what does the word folly refer to? His foolish actions. That he somehow was going to get away with it. That the God who has taken care of them all this way somehow would overlook or not see or let go this matter of him breaking the covenant. And the problem is, he not only troubled himself by doing so, he troubled other people. He caused other people to fail because of his sin. So Joshua woke up early in the morning. He brought Israel by their tribes, and he took the tribe of Judah. Now, I imagine by this time, Achan is shaken. Shaken Achan here. Why? Because out of all the 12 tribes, he picked the right one. And he took the family of the Zarites and so forth, and he brought them to the household, verse 18, man by man, and Achan, says, was taken. Shaken Achan was taken. Oh, I like this getting better all the time. Shaken Achan was taken. So, here is the judgment. My son, give, I pray thee, glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make confession. Now, this is verse number 19. I don't know why Joshua caused Achan to make this confession, because he's not going to receive any mercy here. His confession is not going to get him off the hook. God said, the person that is discovered to have done this is going to be burned. Actually, it's worse than that, as we'll see. So Achan answered Joshua and said, indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels, I coveted them, took them. Behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under them. Here is the picture. The Babylonian garment was used to cover this wedge of gold, and underneath it were these shekels of silver. So you say, well, Pastor, what is what is Achan doing, or what has he done? Well, if you'll turn back with me to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4. We'll read some things, and we'll remind you of some things. Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4. Now, time and again, God said, do not become involved in the religions of these nations. And don't take anything, especially the Jericho, with regard to this. And I believe that Jericho was the key city, the headquarters of their worship. Now, who did they worship? Well, let's look. Verse number 15. Take ye therefore good heed to yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on that day that the Lord spoke to you, lest ye corrupt yourselves and make a graven image, a similitude, the likeness of male or female, any beast that's on the earth, winged fowl, anything that creeps on the earth, verse 18, or lest you lift up your eyes unto heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, the stars, even all the host of heaven, you should be driven to worship them. Now, let's just remind you here, because of our time, let's just remind you here of some things. When it says it was a Babylonish garment, that takes us back to what in history? Babylon. What was Babylon? I'll tell you. Instead of doing that, let's go back and verify it. Just go back to Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11. And as you're finding your place there at verse number 1, if you will remember, Babylon is the place from which God scattered the nations of the world into their various places. The Canaanites went to the land of Canaan after the Tower of Babel. And the incident here, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. Let's build a city and a tower whose top may reach to heaven. We've studied this before. It means whose top reflects the heavens because they were worshiping the heavens. Mainly what heavenly bodies? The sun, the moon, and the stars. This was a one world religion in Babylon. They had their priests, they had their gods, they had their objects of worship, they had their means of redemption. I believe that the Babylonian garment that Achan came across was a priestly garment. I believe that the wedge of gold was part of their sun worship. Now, all of us have seen the graphics where you have a round circle and you cut pieces of pie out of it. And that pie is called a what? That one piece is called a wedge. But if you put them all together, it constructs the whole. And here you've got the sun. This golden wedge was one piece of the sun. And the people in Jericho, their ancestors, all the way back to Babylon, took the priestly garment, took the wedge of gold that typified the sun, and took what silver is always the metal that redeems the body. And they took part of the collection, as it were, of the silver shekels that was collected here. And it was part of their church service. So, lest we be scattered abroad on the face of the earth. What did God do? The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the men built. People is one language. They also had one religion. Nothing is restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Let's confound their language. They might not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and the place was named Babel. Now, while we're here, let's go to chapter 12. Recall your history. They were to go to all the world. They didn't. They stayed at Babel. They instituted a one-world government and a one-world religion with priests, gods, objects of worship, and a collection for redemption, the silver coins, the shekels. But God scattered them. And now Israel is going to be promised the very land into which the Canaanites went. And the Canaanites were those in Jericho, those in Ai, and so forth. And note, verse number 6, chapter 12. And Abram passed through the land into a place called Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh. And the Canaanite was then in the land. What happened? They took the priestly garments, they took the gold, they took the silver, and they just brought it with them to the land. And when they built Jericho, they kept these very things, that were part of the original Babylonian worship. They kept these very things, and in fact started worshiping the host of heaven once they got there. Jericho itself means the moon. And so they had the moon represented, they had the sun represented, they had the Babylonian priesthood represented there, and they had the means of their redemption, giving to their church the silver shekels. And this is what Achan got. Now, that's why God wanted it all devoted to him. Nothing should go to these other gods. Nothing should go to that spiritual service instituted at Babylon. All should be taken and given to the treasury house of the Lord, because true redemption, true worship belongs to one God only, and that's the God. One priesthood only, the priesthood of Israel. So this is what is happening here. So let's go back to Joshua. And that's why it says in verse number 21, I coveted them. They were devoted to the Lord. They became accursed when he coveted them, took them, stole them, removed them from the premises, deceived others, saying he was going to put them in the treasure house when he ended up putting them in his own tent. How did he put them there? He took the priestly garment. He took that which represented their God, the sun, the wedge of gold, covered it up. He put the silver underneath it, and he hid him in a tent. All right. Joshua sent messengers, verse 22. They ran into the tent. Behold, it was hid in his tent, and the silver under it, just like he said. They took them out of the midst of the tent. In order for the people to serve God effectively, anything that is devoted to another God, another system of worship, another system of redemption has to be removed. God will not give us strength over our enemies, will be constantly defeated unless it is removed out of our system. And that, of course, is the filling of the Spirit for us. So let's go on. And all the children of Israel laid them out before the Lord. And Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, the silver, the garment, the wedge of gold, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his asses, the sheep, his tent, all that he had. They brought them to the valley of Achor. Now, why did Achan's whole family have to be destroyed? It's because Achan's family knew what went on. Achan's family was privy to this particular information. And Achan was doing it to better himself and his entire family by taking what belonged to another God, supposedly to give it to the true God, so that all honor would go to him. He took it for himself so that his whole family might be benefited. So, in order for God to bless Israel, everybody involved in the conspiracy, everything associated with them, everything that they touched and owned had to be eliminated. And that's how serious God is with this sin problem. By the way, that's what he does in our resurrection bodies. It is a total eradication of the sin nature, total change of these bodies, making them from corruptible to incorruptible, mortal to immortal. So, he brought them to the valley of Achor. Now, the valley of Achor simply means where Achan was judged, where the troubler was eliminated from Israel. So that any time you have the valley of Achor mentioned subsequent to this point, it was a reminder to Israel of what God did to one man who took of things that were not his, that belonged strictly to God. Here's what Joshua said. Why have you troubled us? The Lord's going to trouble you. And all Israel stoned him with stones. Now, why did they have to stone him with stones? It represents a broken law. Exactly. On the mount, Moses got 2 tablets of stone. He came down and he broke them. And since that time, stoning became the peculiar way of capital punishment in Israel. It represented the broken law, so they used stones, represented by those tablets broken, and stoned Achan. And not only that, the stone represents the foundation of the kingdom. In fact, let's go back, holding your place here, to Romans chapter 9. Romans chapter 9. Verse number 30. What shall we say then? That the Gentiles which followed not after righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness which is of faith. But Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, didn't attain to it. Why? Verse 32, because they didn't have faith, but as it were by the works of the law, and they stumbled at the stumbling stone. As it is written, behold, in Zion I lay a stumbling stone and a rock of offense. But, now again, that's the foundation. That's the kingdom. If you trip over him, you're in trouble. You're going to be judged. But if you believe on him, Jesus said, whosoever shall stand upon this rock, it has a foundation, but on whomsoever this rock shall fall, it shall grind him to powder. So I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, a rock of offense. Whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. Okay, we're back in Joshua 7 now. So their stoning him had tremendous symbolic implications. First, the broken law. Next, the foundation of the kingdom itself and the Lord Jesus Christ. But it says they stoned him with stones and burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. We're going to totally get rid of these people. And it is doing just that. It is burning the flesh off their bones. It's burning what was transmitted by Adam through the flesh, the old sin nature, and that which caused Achan trouble. He lusted, coveted these things rather than obeying God. So they burned the flesh, the entire family, after they stoned him with stones, and they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day. Now, by the way, covering over with a heap of stones, again, is the kingdom judgment. We believe that the earth is going to have, the earth has hell beneath it, and the kingdom of God is going to be over it and the like. But there's another situation where somebody was covered with stones, a heap of stones, and the outcome was far different. You know who that was? The Apostle Paul. They drew him out of Lystra, and they stoned him there, and they covered him with a heap of stones. But it is that exact place where he says, I'm not sure if I was in the body or out of the body, but he went where? To the third heaven. So one guy here troubled Israel, and he was covered over with stones, but it was his judgment. Another time when Israel was out of favor, they covered Paul with stones, but it ended up him being transported to the third heaven and seeing things by grace that were unspeakable, glorious, wonderful things. And the reason no one knew if he was in the body or out of the body is why? He was under a heap of stones. All right, let's finish this off. They raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day, and as a result, the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Principle for us is exactly the same thing. If we're involved in putting God out of our lives, we're letting pride, arrogance run our lives. If we're in the house of vanity, we're going to end up like Achan, a heap of ruins. Instead, we need to make it through to the Bethel, the house of God, where God is going to bless us. So the name of that place was called the Valley of Achor, where Achan the troubler was judged unto this day. Okay. Any questions about this? Any questions, comments, observations, and the like? Even though it's Old Testament, again, we try to draw parallels between what happened here and what can happen with us if we get out of fellowship. God is no longer for us in life, and we'll turn our backs on our enemies.